Alright, hello guys, my name is Andres Garza, and today I'm going to be talking about Chapter 2, the innate immunity. And if you haven't watched my first video, which was on Introduction to the Immune System, you can if you want, but this is going to essentially be the next part of that. So, innate immunity. I have some pre-illustrations shown already, but first I want to give you a little description of the immune system. So the immune system is essentially this big complex network of cells and molecules, and they essentially work together to help protect our own bodies from infections and threats that you can see here, right? Infections and threats. So the immune system also serves as our body's initial defense mechanism, and it provides different types of rapid and also non-specific responses. So these responses can range from a wide variety depending on the types of invaders, right? So nonetheless, I'm going to kind of go into what I had drawn here previously. So the immune system, we can think of it something as the immune system is essentially in our body, and we can think of our body as a castle or a house, right? So in our on the castle, we have different types of uses. We have a video surveillance system to protect ourselves from bad guys. We have a light system in order to see who's going in and out, right? We want to have eyes from what's going on. And of course, we have a door, right? We're always having people go in the building and out of the building, as well as different roles, right? So in the immune system, we have different types of cells that have different types of functions. So we have someone just coming in and out, and then we also have something like a janitor, right? Janitor. And the janitor is going to be keeping the place up to spec, right? You want to make sure it's maintained, clean, and healthy. The healthier your immune system is, the better it will be and more up to spec, right? So let's say, for example, if you're, oh yeah, so on top of that, we also have a giant barrier with the river, right? We can think of this as a cell wall, right? So let's say, for example, if the janitor does not keep the river clean, it's going to get full of a bunch of mess and stuff like that, and it's going to allow invaders to go into the castle because it's not being maintained properly. When it's not being maintained properly, this has the ability to invade it and take over, and it's going to explode. No, it's not going to actually explode, but it'll become more at a risk for being damaged. And when it's damaged, you don't want that to really happen, right? So the pathogens. So your body has an immune system, which is like a house, and it has different forms of defense, right? And there's a janitor keeping the place up to spec, and it's keeping our body healthy from these things called pathogens, right? Pathogens are like the bad guys. The bad guys want to try to infiltrate the house. That way, it can take over and mess everything up and make it and just use it for themselves for their own good. So these pathogens are kind of right here, and they're essentially like they're a bunch of germs. Pathogens are bad. These pathogens have something called antigens, which are at the top of the little spikes, right? These antigens are kind of like a key and lock mechanism, right? So we can see here that's like a U, and these antigens essentially attach to the cell wall, which have these small little receptors, and they have the same thing as well. So we can see it's kind of like a key and lock mechanism. And whenever that antigen attaches properly, it's going to start infiltrating into the cell wall, and it will eventually take over, and it's going to mess everything up, right? So what you want to do is whenever you have a bad guy go into your house, you want to have different types of defense mechanisms, right? So that's why, yeah. So we have different types of defense mechanisms, right? That's why we have the light displaying to visualize bad guys going in and out. That's why we have a video surveillance system for memory and other stuff. But of course, the memory isn't going to really happen right now because we're discussing innate immunity. Innate immunity is essentially the first line of defense, right? So we have three different types of defense mechanisms within our immune system. So first we have the innate immunity, which is natural defense, and this is present at birth, right? Innate is present at birth because we're naturally born with this kind of immune system. It is also non-specific. Non-specific, right? It's a non-specific type of immunity, and this essentially means that it doesn't care who comes in, it's going to automatically fight them off because it doesn't want anybody to come in. It's just the first rule of defense, right? It's non-specific, and it has non-specific resistance to infection. So as opposed to the adaptive immune system, adaptive immunity, right? This one is specific, and it occurs after birth. It also must be acquired, which means that we need to encounter these different types of pathogens so that we can build something that is called immunologic memory. Must be acquired. Right, so that is something, this right here, that is adaptive. Oops. This adaptive memory is essentially the video surveillance system, and it can kind of like memorize or detect the bad guys whenever it sees them. So yeah, that's the innate immunity. And so the innate immunity is non-specific, and the adaptive immunity is specific. So with more of that, we also have, since we're going to be talking about innate immunity, we have several different types of defenses against pathogens. So we have physical barriers, right? So let me try drawing a picture of the human body. It's just going to be an outline. Right. So I'm going to make a copy of this again. Copy, and then paste like this. That's actually pretty ugly. Okay, so the body is going to consist of our skin, right? So the skin is the integumentary system, and on the skin we have different types of barriers. So we have a physical barrier, of course, physical barrier, and this essentially, let me put all these tight skin junctions, right? So this does not allow for microbes to go through. Why? Because we have a bunch of tight skin junctions, and it's essentially creating a type of cell wall, a wall from allowing the antigens from coming through. However, whenever you get something like a cut, right, those tight skin junctions are going to be broken. So that means that the antigen, or the not the antigen, but the pathogen, can then go through, allowing its antigens to attach to the receptors of the cell, and then breaking into your cells. So that's the importance of physical barrier. So now moving on to other forms of defense, we have. Let me just draw this real quick for you guys. So we have antimicrobial defense. So on our skin, we naturally have antibiotics, right? Antibiotics. Can't spell this. Antibiotics, right? So we have antibiotics, and this allows, so like say for example, whenever we have a bacteria trying to infiltrate our immune system or trying to go through our body, we naturally have good bacteria on our skin, right? So that's why not all bacteria is bad. It's actually pretty. Some of it is good, and we have a kind of like a symbiotic relationship with them. So these antibiotics are going to fight off the bacteria and not allow it from coming in. It's going to pretty much kill them. And then on top of that, we also have lymphocytes, right? Killing the microbes and infected cells by intraepithelial lymphocytes, right? So we have lymphocytes on here. Right, and they can essentially attach to these microbes, right? Because it's a lock and key mechanism. A lock and key mechanism, and it can kill it, right? Lymphocytes. So that's that. Those are some lines of defense against our immune system. So other different types of components for the innate immune system is, of course, the skin, which we just talked about in depth right now. And then we also have other things such as, let me put something, I don't know how to do a nose, but that's going to be mucosal. Mucosal. So the mucosal epithelia or mucosal barriers pretty much just have a bunch of so mucus is essentially a bunch of dead white blood cells, and what happens is these dead white blood cells, what's it called? They accumulate within different parts of the body, and this creates kind of like a little thin barrier. So let's say if this is your nose lining, right? And you have all this is your nose lining, and then this is the epithelia, and that's the nose lining on the outside. Those are your hairs, right? So the hairs essentially create all these different types of mucuses, right? It wants to secrete these mucuses because whenever you breathe in air, right, within that air, sometimes that air can come with pathogens. Those pathogens can then attach to your epithelial barrier. However, whenever you have mucus, that mucus then creates an extra lining so that it can then so that the pathogen can then attach to the mucus, and it can then be secreted by blowing out your nose, right? Blowing out your nose, right? So that's the importance of mucosal epithelia and the mucus. Not only does this occur within your nose, but other parts as well, such as your respiratory tract, other places also. So on top of that, we also have the shedding of our cells, right? So like we saw on the skin, we have epithelial barriers, and some of these epithelial barriers can have multiple layers, right? So it's going to be like this, like this. It's going to keep on going the whole way, right? So we have microbes that enter, that try entering at least, right? And since we have so many barriers, it's going to be extremely difficult for those microbes to uh, to penetrate all the way through. So that's the importance of that. And then also, whenever we have damaged cells, they'll just break right off, right? They'll break right off. But then that's also why we have other barriers as well, right beneath them. So that would be the shedding of our cells that carry microbes. So another one would also be flushing action, such as saliva, tears, and urine, right? So the same thing with this, whenever we get deposits into our eye, such as dust, that dust can also carry microbes. But whenever we get that into our eye, we can start tearing up, right? We can start tearing up, and that essentially flushes out our eyes so that it can try to wash out any types of microbes that are present. The same thing within our saliva. We can sneeze, right? We can sneeze, and whenever we have a buildup of stuff in our lining or our lungs, let's just put a bunch of bad stuff in here, right? We want to cough or we want to sneeze or spit out those microbes, and yeah, that's a part of saliva. It's kind of the same thing as mucosal, but this is just within our mouth, not our nose. So yeah, those will be some of the mechanical barriers of innate immunity. So yeah, we have different types of components, and within those components, we have other specialized cells as well. So we have these specialized cells called phagocytes, and these phagocytes consist of neutrophils and monocytes. And then these phagocytes, yeah, they consist of these two. And then we also have cells that are responsible for inflammation. This is really important, and I'll talk to you guys about it right now. So these specialized cells for inflammation consist of basophils, eosinophils, and mast cells. Next, we have our natural killer cells. Let me just put NK cells. And then we also have our lymphocytes. Right. So we have all these different types with each of their own unique function. We also have macrophages as well. These are very, very important. So these macrophages essentially play a role in both types of our immune system. They can be either innate or adaptive. These macrophages can also be known as antigen-presenting cells. These antigen-presenting cells, essentially what they do is whenever we have a pathogen come into our body, they can then trap them and present them to the security's office, otherwise known as the lymph node or the cell, so they can then be processed and eliminated properly. Right. So we have different characteristics for each one of these cells. Right. So we can start off by the mast cell. The mast cell pretty much just looks like this, right? Has that with some circles, and they're located on different parts of the body. Each one of these cells has a unique role with a unique location for the most part. So they can be located on connective tissues or mucous membranes, right? So they would be over here with the sinuses. So as for the macrophage, these macrophages are located within the blood vessels, right? Because, like how I said, excuse me, whenever you have a pathogen enter your body that doesn't belong there, sometimes that pathogen can go into your bloodstream, and you want to have an abundance of these macrophages within your bloodstream. Right, so you want to have macrophage, 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 and then you have a bunch of your little white blood cells, or red blood cells, sorry. So let me just put M. And then we can put like pathogens, just a couple of them. And sometimes we'll already have pathogens inside our body. However, the only difference is that the reason why we're not sick is because our immune system is so well developed, and a lot of these macrophages as well as other cells take care of these pathogens right away, and they essentially destroy them. So as for natural killer cells, we have it's kind of similar to the mast cell, except it's just a little bit more granulated. Right. Okay. And then for the dendritic cell, I don't know if I wrote it on here. No, I didn't. Okay, well, the dendritic cell kind of does the same thing, right? But it, oops. Kind of looks like a star. right? And this one is present in the epithelial tissue, and it can be at different parts like the skin, the lungs, the digestive tract, and it also moves towards the lymph nodes in order to become activated. So the lymph nodes are other parts of our body that are responsible for immunity, right? It's its own system. It's kind of like this. I'm just going to do a bunch of little circles. And then I'm just going to do a chain right here to show that it's connected. Kind of like that. Right. So those are the lymph nodes. The lymph nodes also are sites where cells get sent so they can then be processed. And whenever we have an infection, we also have this one thing called inflammation. So the inflammation is part of innate immunity. And essentially, what happens is when a cell becomes damaged, right? So I can do something like your hand or a hand. Three. That's a very ugly hand. Okay, so anyways, that's a hand, right? And whenever it gets hit with the hammer, like that, your hand is going to then become inflamed. Okay, I'm very bad at drawing, but essentially what happens is this is inflamed right here. Inflamed. I don't even know if I spelled that right. Anyways, it becomes inflamed. The reason why it becomes inflamed is because when your cells get damaged, let's say for example it gets hit with something like a hammer, the cells then become ruptured, and because they're ruptured, they're damaged. And when it's damaged, we have a release of these things called cytokines, right? So there are a bunch of these little things, a bunch of little molecules called cytokines. We have a bunch of these little molecules called cytokines, and they send a message to our brain so they can then increase the amount of blood flow to this region right here. That weighs a lot more of these specialized cells, like the ones that I just explained earlier. A lot of these cells can then be sent to the site of damage so that it can then promote more circulation, more blood circulation for tissue repair. Because of course it was damaged, it becomes inflamed, and now it needs to be repaired. So as a result of that, it becomes red, right, due to the increase of blood flow. It becomes swollen due to the amount of blood flow in that area, leading to a bunch of fluid buildup, and this fluid buildup can also be called edema, right? This edema consists of, how I mentioned earlier, white blood cells, microbes, debris, and other things as well. More so because you have an increase of blood flow, we then have heat occur, right? Because there's a lot of blood in that area, and our blood is warm. It increases the heat, and it's also very painful because of damaged cells. There's exposed nerve endings, and it's very sensitive to the touch, right? So additionally to heat, the reason on why this occurs is not only because of the increase of blood flow, but also because of the immune response due to damaged cells. So let's say, for example, when one becomes sick, let's say, for example, they have the flu, right? Whenever you have the flu, I don't even know if I spelled that right. Whenever you have the flu, it's this virus, and it goes into your body, and you don't feel well, right? You have a temperature, let's say 101 degrees Fahrenheit. You have 101 degrees Fahrenheit, and temperature is super high, and this is because it it promotes a fever that ways it can kill off this type of virus, right? This virus, let's say for example, it can only survive at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and since your body elevates to 101, it can then kill this certain virus and leaving it unable to keep on replicating within your body. So induced fever is actually a good thing, right? It's a very important role within our immune system, and we need it a lot. And since this damaged cell, or since this damaged tissue only occurs in one location, it induces a fever in that one location only. So that's the pretty unique thing about a fever. So yeah. So back to the cells, we have different uses. So the natural killer cells, these natural killer cells can detect and destroy infected or abnormal cells, right? Infected or abnormal, right? And something such as this could be something like a cancer, right? We have a cancer on the skin, right? We have a mutated DNA. Oh, that is terrible. I am a very terrible artist, in case you guys didn't know, right? Double helix strand. There is the DNA like that, and it becomes mutated, and we have the replication of a cell, which then builds up like this, and then it becomes even worse. It keeps on replicating because it's damaged DNA and it has no stop for replication, and it essentially becomes cancer, a tumor slash cancer, right? So this cancer is bad. Why? Because it's an abnormal cell that continues to keep on replicating. Cell, right? It keeps on replicating. So what happens is whenever your immune system is when your immune system is in a healthy state. Sometimes we can actually have cancer within our bodies all the time, but since our immune system is so well developed, it can then fight them off. So essentially, what it does is these natural killer cells, NK natural killer cells, like this, they fight off the cancer and they eliminate them. So the cancer is an abnormal cell that is it continues to keep on replicating, and that would be the purpose of it. So it can kill infected or abnormal cells. So yeah, that is pretty much it. So some more stuff about it is whenever pathogens reach the body's barriers of the immune system of the innate immune system, cells can spring into action, like how I mentioned earlier. So these phagocytes that I showed you right here initially, these phagocytes, um, sorry, I need to catch my breath real quick. So these phagocytes play an important role as well. They essentially help us with fighting off different parts of different pathogens within our immune system, and they're pretty important. So yeah, that would pretty much consist of my presentation and show you a little visual representation of how the innate immune system works and some important factors of it. And yeah, I want to thank you guys for watching, and that's it.